I was used and manipulated by a colleague at work, but I found courage and changed everything. I never imagined I'd reach the point of exploding in front of everyone. I've always been the kind of person who lets things slide, who tries to avoid arguments, and who believes that being kind is the best way to maintain peace around me. Since adolescence, I was taught that it was rude to clash, that it was better to swallow than to react. And I carried this with me to work, always trying to be the helpful, patient, and nice colleague. For a long time, this worked, until I realized my kindness was becoming a weapon against me. It all started with small situations. A colleague, Rafaela, would say she'd forgotten her wallet, ask someone to pay for a taxi, or swear she'd transfer the cost of lunch later. At first, it seemed harmless, as if it were just a distraction or a bad day. But it grew. Soon, she began repeating the same stories more and more frequently, making up different excuses, always appealing to the human side of others. And since no one wanted to embarrass her, it ended up being left at that. I was always among those who opened their wallets, thinking it was the right thing to do, that one day life would return this kindness. Until I realized her behavior wasn't carelessness, it was manipulation. She took pleasure in taking advantage of our silence. The day that marked my turning point was at a work dinner. There were 8 of us. The atmosphere was light, everyone laughing and relaxed, until the bill arrived. I already knew what was coming. Rafaela started fidgeting, reaching into her purse, acting like she was looking for her card, sighing deeply and saying, "Oh guys, I've maxed out. How embarrassing." I saw the looks on everyone's faces, the discomfort etched on their faces. And, as always, someone relented. But this time, it was I who pulled out the card and paid. At that moment, I didn't say anything, but something inside me snapped. It wasn't about the money, but about the feeling of being part of a scam. I went home feeling a mixture of shame, anger, and self-disgust. I lay in bed remembering her face, that victimized look, and I felt like an idiot. I also remembered other situations, other bills, other times she feigned embarrassment. I saw a pattern and realized that as long as we didn't do anything, this would continue. For the first time, I felt my patience had a limit. I didn't want to live being used anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my heart racing at the thought of confronting her. Part of me wanted to give up, let it go, continue avoiding conflict because it was more comfortable. But another part screamed that I needed to react, that I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see it. It was then that I remembered I'd saved a lot of evidence without even realizing it. I had screenshots of messages in which she asked for loans, photos of bar and restaurant bills that always ended up being unfairly divided, and even receipts in my email showing who had actually paid. I never kept anything out of malice, but out of habit, perhaps even as a way of protecting myself. That night, I decided these things weren't going to stay put. I was going to use them. I didn't know how or when, but I would. It was a scary thought because I'd never been one to confront anyone, but just thinking I could change that situation made me feel different. I was tired of swallowing hard and smiling. For the first time, I saw the possibility of putting an end to it. The next day was a whirlwind. I woke up with a queasy feeling in my stomach, feeling like I was heading into a difficult test or an important interview. At work, I tried to concentrate, but every time Rafaela opened her mouth, I felt my blood boil. It was as if everything became clearer. I saw the small manipulations, the hints she dropped, the looks in her eyes when the bill arrived. It was a rehearsed script, repeated so many times that it had become automatic. By afternoon, we were all gathered in the break room for coffee. There, Rafaela started making conversation, telling me that her bank had blocked her card and that she might not be able to make it to the next happy hour. I knew this was the prelude to yet another plea for help. My heart raced. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and looked in the mirror. I whispered to myself, "You're not going to keep quiet today." That alone was enough to ignite a strength within me. I returned to the kitchen, determined. My hands were sweaty, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. I hadn't rehearsed anything, but I knew I couldn't swallow it anymore. When Rafaela finished speaking, I stood up. Everyone looked at me because I've never been one to interrupt or raise my voice. I took a deep breath and said, "I think we need to be serious about some things that are happening." Rafaela laughed, trying to hide it, but I continued. I took out my phone and showed her the conversations, the screenshots, the photos of the bills, the receipts. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. I said it wasn't fair. that we were all tired of paying for her, that kindness didn't mean being exploited. The silence in the room was heavy. No one expected that to come from me. Rafaela was speechless, tried to defend herself, but I had already shown too much evidence. For the first time, I felt I was no longer being used, that I had regained my voice. After I spoke, the mood grew strange, as if the air had grown heavier. I myself was afraid of what I had just done. It felt like my entire body was shaking inside. But at the same time, I felt a rush of relief, as if I had carried a ton of weight on my shoulders and had finally let go. Rafaela turned white, tried to laugh nervously and said, "Oh guys, you know I go through hardships. It's not like that." But no one responded. I looked at my colleagues' faces and saw their shock, but I also saw something different. It was as if someone had finally said what everyone had been holding back. Lucas shook his head. Amanda crossed her arms. Zoe looked away. But everyone seemed to agree without needing words. For the first time, Rafaela no longer had an audience. I sat back down, but my heart still felt like it was going to burst. I was afraid I'd gone too far, that I'd regret it later, but the feeling of courage was greater. I thought about how many times I'd come home crying, feeling like I'd been made a fool of, and that gave me more strength. Rafaela still tried to justify herself, saying that everyone has needed help at some point, but no one spoke up for her. It was in that silence that I realized it wasn't just me. Everyone there was already tired, but they hadn't had the courage to speak up. The difference was that I, the quietest one, was the one who decided to break the circle. This thought gave me immense clarity. How many times do we keep quiet to keep the peace? But in reality, we only prolong the problem. When the impromptu meeting ended, I went to my desk feeling lost. My fingers were still shaking, my face burning as if I'd been electrocuted. I wondered if there would be consequences, if Rafaela would hate me, if I'd made a lifelong enemy. At the same time, I received discreet messages from colleagues. Miguel sent me a "thanks for speaking up." Amanda walked past me and squeezed my shoulder, saying nothing. These small gestures made me feel like I wasn't alone. It was as if I'd unlocked a door that had been locked to everyone. The courage to speak up carried a huge weight, but it also brought support. It was contradictory. Fear and relief all rolled into one. That day, when I got home, I cried in the shower. It wasn't from sadness, it was a mixed cry, like cleansing. I remembered every word, every look, and wondered why it had taken me so long to do it. I was afraid of being called a troublemaker, of losing friendships, of being seen as harsh. But I realized that what really hurt me was keeping quiet and swallowing. I lay in bed exhausted, but for the first time in a long time, I was able to sleep without my head full of anger. I slept as if I had put an end to something that had been eating away at me for months. The next day, the atmosphere at work was different. Rafaela was quiet, didn't make conversation, didn't make those usual scenes. The group seemed lighter, as if her mask had slipped. No one made sarcastic comments or pretended not to notice. It was as if, after the confrontation, everyone had silently agreed not to fall into the same trap again. I felt strangely respected, as if the image they had of me had changed. For the first time, I wasn't seen as the naive, accepting person. I was seen as someone capable of defending herself and others, and that deeply affected me. I'll never forget the feeling I had when I walked into the cafeteria the next day. Usually, Rafaela was the first to make jokes, to draw attention, to take up space. But that day, she was cowering, fiddling with her phone, not looking anyone in the eye. Her silence was louder than any words. I sat down, grabbed my coffee, and watched. Inside, I was still afraid. Would she confront me alone later? Would she spread rumors about me? But nothing happened. On the contrary, it seemed she had lost the power she once held over the group. No one offered to pay for anything anymore. No one entertained her excuses. It was as if everyone had woken up from a trance. I, who had always considered myself fragile, had been the trigger for this change. That afternoon, Lucas came to my desk. He's a laid-back guy, rarely getting involved in anything. But that day, he looked at me and said, "You did what we've all wanted to do for a long time. Thank you." I didn't know what to say. I could only smile awkwardly, because I hadn't quite grasped what had happened. That sentence of his kept resonating in my head for the rest of the day. It was as if I'd represented the voice of several people, not just my own. It gave me a strange sense of responsibility, but also a pride I'd never felt before. It wasn't vanity, It was a sense of justice. In the days that followed, I began to notice myself differently. I walked taller, spoke more firmly, and didn't apologize for everything. I realized how much I'd previously shrunk to please others, and how it had only hurt me. It was as if that confrontation had unlocked something inside me. It wasn't just about Rafaela. It was about learning to set boundaries in any situation. Kindness remains a part of who I am, but now I understand it shouldn't be confused with submission. I can be good, but I won't be stupid anymore. Of course, not everything was easy. Rafaela started avoiding me, and at times, I felt sideways glances. She never tried to ask me for anything again, but I could tell she held a grudge. I myself had to deal with a strange guilt, as if I'd been too harsh. I wondered, did I overreact? Did I expose more than I should have? But whenever this doubt arose, I remembered the nights I'd come home crying with rage. I remembered the money I'd spent. I remembered the burden it had become. And then the guilt lessened. Because deep down I knew. I hadn't acted out of malice. I'd acted for emotional survival. One day, weeks later, I was in the elevator and Amanda came in. She was silent for a few seconds and then said, "Nicole, you have no idea how much you've inspired me. Always thought you were the quiet one, the one who didn't react. But you showed me that it's possible to be firm without losing who you are. I've learned so much from you." I was speechless. I'd never thought I could be a role model for anyone. In that moment, I realized my actions had gone beyond what I'd imagined. Not only had I freed myself, but I'd also paved the way for others to understand that they can stand up for themselves. And that moved me deeply. As time passed, I realized that day hadn't just been a confrontation with Rafaela, but with myself. I found myself confronted with a version of myself I hadn't recognized before, a woman who had the courage to stand up and speak out when needed. It was strange, because I'd always defined myself as the calm one, the one who preferred to avoid arguments. But after what happened, I realized that even those who are peaceful have a limit. And when that limit is crossed, we have to choose. Either we continue to diminish ourselves, or we find the voice we've been keeping hidden. I chose the latter. This didn't turn me into an aggressive person, quite the opposite. It just showed me that I, too, deserve respect. The work environment changed significantly after that episode. It wasn't just Rafaela who became more withdrawn. Everyone started to police themselves more, to be more fair. The bills began to be divided clearly, with everyone taking care of their own. Excuses disappeared. It was as if the truth had cleared the air, and no one wanted to risk repeating the same pattern. I also began to be seen differently. People who had barely spoken to me began to seek me out more, to listen to me, to respect me. This was new for me, because I'd never liked attention, but I understood that respect isn't something you ask for. It's earned. Even with all these changes, there was still a battle raging inside me. I still felt afraid of being misunderstood, afraid that Rafaela would spread bad stories about me. I would wake up, sometimes with my heart racing, remembering the day I showed the evidence. But along with the fear came a sense of freedom. I knew that, whatever happened, I no longer had the burden of being deceived in silence. It was as if I had regained something I had lost, my dignity, and that is priceless. I told this story to a childhood friend and she was surprised. She said she'd never imagined me confronting someone like that. I didn't believe it myself until I experienced it. She said something that stuck with me. "Nicole, the difference between you then and you now isn't that you've become tough, it's that you've learned to protect yourself." That phrase resonated with me because I've always associated firmness with toughness, as if I had to change who I am. But I've come to understand that's not the case. I'm still kind, only now with clear boundaries. If I could sum up everything I learned that day, I would say that kindness isn't about sacrificing yourself for others to the point of self-destruction. True kindness also involves self-respect. Because if I don't respect myself, how can I expect others to respect me? Today, I see that confronting Rafaela wasn't just about exposing manipulation, but about freeing myself from a pattern that had held me captive for years. I learned that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but acting even when you're trembling, even when you think you can't handle it. And when we do that, we discover a strength we never imagined we had. Today, when I remember that day, I feel a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. Pride because I finally found my voice, and exhaustion because it took me a long time to realize I needed to use it. It wasn't easy to face Rafaela. It wasn't easy to show evidence. It wasn't easy to endure the heavy silence in the room while everyone took in the situation, but it was necessary. And even months later, I still feel a weight on my chest when I think about it, as if I've relived the tension of that moment. But at the same time, I feel a sense of victory, of freedom, that something inside me has changed forever. My name is Nicole, I'm 32 years old, and I can say that episode transformed me. I never imagined myself as a person of action, but I learned that sometimes life puts you in situations that require courage, and you discover you're capable of much more than you imagined. I still feel afraid to speak out. I still find myself hesitating before confronting injustices. But now, that hesitation is lessened because I know I can face whatever comes my way. I learned that staying silent out of convenience only prolongs the pain, and that sometimes kindness needs to be accompanied by clear boundaries. After that episode, my colleagues began to change too. I saw Lucas and Zoe speak out more. I saw Amanda demand accountability without fear of judgment. I felt part of something bigger than myself, a group that learned for the first time to collectively protect itself from manipulation. This gave me hope that justice isn't always about grand actions, but about small, everyday gestures of courage. I understood that when someone finds the strength to act, they can inspire others without even realizing it. I still have days of doubt, days when I wonder if I should have handled things differently, if I was too harsh. But then I return to that moment, remembering the nights I cried at home, the weight I carried paying bills that weren't mine, and I realized that every tear was worth it. Today I feel more whole, stronger, more capable of facing injustice without feeling guilty. I discovered that my voice matters, that my limits matter, and that it is possible to protect yourself without losing who you are. Ultimately, that day taught me that life doesn't wait for us to be ready to act. Sometimes you just need to summon courage, even if you're trembling inside, and do what's right. I didn't become aggressive or different from what I always was. I simply discovered that my kindness doesn't need to be exploited, and that standing up for yourself is an act of courage that transforms everything around me. Today, I feel more confident, more aware, and more capable of setting boundaries without fear. And even though the memory of the confrontation still tightens my chest, I know I wouldn't go back. It was the first time I truly put myself first and realized the power I have.